We are getting information that India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Ramallah for his first ever visit to Palestine. Now, these are the first visuals that you're seeing on WION of the Indian Prime Minister who's flown in a chopper from Amman, the capital of Jordan, directly into Ramallah. He has not made a stop in Israel, and anyone who's traveled to the Palestinian territory will know that they always have to go through via Israel. And this is a significant visit, a historic one, that the first Indian Prime Minister is stepping foot on Palestinian soil. Remember, India in recent years has been improving its relationship with the State of Israel, but at the same time reiterating its independent stand on the cause of the Palestinians. The Indian Prime Minister has landed in Ramallah. These are the very first visuals that we are getting of the Indian Prime Minister who has just landed in Jerusalem. He'll also be visiting the Mausoleum of Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader who had put the struggle of the Palestinians virtually in the eye of the world. And to discuss the significance of this visit, we are joined in our studios by Ambassador Arun Singh. Ambassador, this of course is something that was expected for quite some time. A lot of questions were asked. India is inching closer towards Israel, so has India abandoned the cause of the Palestinians? Because remember, India was the first nation in 1988, the first non-Arab nation that had recognized Palestine as a state when it had declared itself to be a state. And now the Indian Prime Minister is making a significant, important message that he's sending out by going directly to Palestine without landing in Israel.
So, as you mentioned, in 1988, India had recognized the state of Palestine, among the first countries to do so. Also in 1975, India was the first non-Arab country to recognize the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. So that also was significant. And I think in terms of the visit today, it is important that the Prime Minister has gone directly.
All right, the entourage is just stepping down. You can see Ajit Doval, who has in fact stepped out from the chopper. We also expect the Prime Minister to just step out in any minute now. This is an extremely historic and a significant visit. The first Prime Minister from India who's stepping foot on Palestinian soil. And there we see Prime Minister Narendra Modi in pursuit of an independent foreign policy. Perhaps his greatest achievement of his tenure is that of the manner in which he has driven his foreign policy, Act East and Link West. In many ways, this is a symbolic visit. In many ways, this is a visit which will send across a very strong message to the rest of the world that India can also walk the talk. It's not talking pleasantries. It's not just reiterating the moral high point, but also to walk the talk. What do you expect will come out of this visit, Ambassador? So,
during the visit itself, I think there will be a certain emphasis on areas of cooperation. But before going into that, one is the symbolic aspect.
Right.
That the Prime Minister has made a visit to Palestine. He is the first Indian Prime Minister to have done so. He has made the visit going directly from Amman to Ramallah, bypassing formally any Israeli control area.
Right.
Because since the area is under Israel's occupation, normally to go to Palestinian area, you have to go through an Israeli control point. And I think Israel would have given concurrence to the Indian Prime Minister going directly, because they have also been reassured by the manner in which the politics and optics of the India-Israel relationship has improved over the past several years. The Indian Prime Minister made a first ever visit to Israel in 2017.
Absolutely.
The Israeli Prime Minister made a return visit in January 2018 in a very short span. So with all that happening, I think they would have been reasonably reassured to concur with the Indian Prime Minister going directly to Palestine, although their preferred option would be that also come to Israel and then go to Palestine. But obviously they have concurred. So I think this is a very symbolic in that aspect, also in terms of reflecting where the India-Israel relationship is and the statement we want to make about the relationship with Palestine.
Absolutely.
But I think in areas of cooperation, I think there'd be emphasis on areas for capacity building in the Palestinian.
Because India does do a lot of capacity building work there in terms of running several of those hospitals, several of those schools. The problem essentially is Palestine as a state has not yet established itself. So having full-fledged diplomatic ties would be difficult in that case?
Well, we have full-fledged diplomatic ties in a sense because in Delhi there is a Palestinian embassy. There's a Palestinian ambassador. And as part of his assistance program, India had given the funds for the construction of the Palestinian embassy in New Delhi, as again to enable the diplomatic relations between India and Palestine to be taken forward. But and we have a representation in Ramallah.
Right.
We don't call it an embassy because they are still under occupation. But it is called a representative office. And there's an Indian representative office there. And very small number of countries have representative offices in Ramallah.
Absolutely.
That again is a reflection of the importance we attach to the Palestinian issue and to our cooperation with the Palestinian people.
Absolutely, indeed, Ambassador. So we just see Indian convoy of the Indian Prime Minister there leaving the airport at Ramallah. The first stop for Prime Minister Narendra Modi will, of course, be the Yasser Arafat Mausoleum, where he'll be laying a wreath in tribute of the legendary Palestinian leader who, in fact, put the Palestinian struggle on the world map. And in many ways, this of course is a recognition of the struggle of the people of Palestine, because right from immediately in the aftermath of the independence, from the establishment of the State of Israel, India had always been very closely allying itself with the cause of the Palestinians. And in recent years, there was this criticism that perhaps India may not be walking the talk. It may be a lot of pleasantries that are spoken. But now, in this case, do you think India is also walking the talk with the Indian Prime Minister being there on Palestinian soil?
So, of course, there was some criticism, but there will always be a criticism of any particular policy option that you exercise. My own view has been that that criticism was not really justified.
Right.
Because India had maintained its position on the Palestine issue. What it had done was not allowed that to come in the way of strengthening bilateral relations with Israel. So we went ahead to strengthen our bilateral relations with Israel, be it in defense, be it in water, be it in agriculture, in higher technology, in areas where they served India's interest.
Absolutely.
So ultimately, every country has to look at any issue from the perspective of its own interest. And if it was in our interest, while not compromising our principles, to build on the bilateral relationship with Israel, we should do that. And that's exactly what we did.
Absolutely.
And again, as you saw with the vote in December on the issue of Jerusalem, India reiterated its position that on the principled aspects of the Israel-Palestine issue, it is staying with its position, whatever be the level of its cooperation with Israel.
Absolutely. And how do you view India's role in Palestine going forward? Will we be asserting ourselves a little more, considering that the UNGA vote, when it happened, a lot of people in India were perhaps in two minds. We were not very clear as to which way we would vote, but India went ahead and voted against the proposal by Donald Trump. Were you taken in by surprise because of that?
I personally was not surprised, because that was clearly the vote that happened in December was consistent with India's position.
Right.
And India, for example, on right of self-determination of the Palestinian people, has voted for that in the UN. And establishing Palestine as a member of the UNESCO, India has voted in favor of that. Having Palestine as a non-member state of the UN, India has voted in favor of that. On several issues of interest to the Palestinians, we have voted in favor of their position. Keeping that in mind, and since our own position has been that we stay with the 1967 lines, and the issue of Jerusalem is something to be negotiated and settled through negotiation between Israel and Palestinians, it made sense for India to vote as it did in December. So I was not really surprised.
Absolutely, indeed. Do continue to stay on with this, Ambassador Singh. Meanwhile, I'm told that we're also joined by our international affairs correspondent, Ramesh Ramachandran. Ramesh, essentially, this visit is about de-hyphenation of India's relationship with Israel and Palestine. It's an extremely complex relationship, but India here is showing that it is also willing to walk the talk when it comes to actually going ahead and proving a point in many ways that, look, we will deal with Israel, but at the same time, we will not abandon the cause of the Palestinians.
Indeed, Mohammed. Now, to build on your point about de-hyphenation, remember, Prime Minister Modi has many firsts to his credit. Two among them are that he is the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel.
Right.
He did that last year. And today he's become
Ramesh, just to interrupt you there, we see
Palestine.
visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi laying the wreath at the mausoleum of Yasser Arafat. This of course, is a 11 by 11 cubicle that's been built for the Palestinian leader who passed away in 2004. And he's also accompanied there by Rami Abdullah, Hamdallah, the Prime Minister of Palestine. We just saw the visuals of Indian Prime Minister laying a wreath at the Mausoleum of Yasser Arafat. Back to you, Ramesh. You were making an important point about the significance of this visit.
Indeed, Mohammed, as I was trying to mention just a few moments ago, Prime Minister Modi has many firsts to his credit in far as foreign policy goes. And two among them are the fact that he became the first Indian Prime Minister ever to visit Israel last year. And today he became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Palestine.
Right.
That said, one interesting aspect of his visit, Mohammed, is that he chose to fly in from Amman in Jordan directly to land in Ramallah, bypassing Israeli territory. And that, to my mind, amplifies your point about dehyphenation of ties between Israel and Palestine. And this is a classic textbook example of how India chooses to dehyphenate ties, meaning thereby that India will treat its ties with Israel and Palestine on its own independent leg, as it were, and that this visit should be seen as India's outreach to Palestine, especially in light of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel last year. And as we speak, Prime Minister Modi has just laid a wreath at the mausoleum, as you mentioned, of late President Yasser Arafat, and they will now tour the Yasser Arafat Museum.
Absolutely, indeed. And Ramesh, just to go back to the point that you in fact made, he flew in a chopper from Amman directly to Ramallah. Is there a message that perhaps needs to be read in the fact that he's so close to Israel, but he's choosing not to visit the state of Israel this time round?
Clearly, if logistics anything to go by, Mohammed, it's self-evident the way he made his way from New Delhi to Amman first and from Amman to Ramallah should tell viewers that he chooses to dehyphenate ties between Israel and Palestine on the one hand, and that he has deliberately chosen to bypass landing or setting foot on Israeli territory. And that would have gone down well with his host, President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine, and the Palestinian leadership.
Absolutely, indeed. Ambassador, let me bring you in on this. Could the Prime Minister have done it slightly differently? Could he have landed in Tel Aviv and then gone to Ramallah? Would the visit have been any less significant if he'd done that?
So I think if he landed in Tel Aviv, then today would have been a difficult day to make a visit, because today is Sabbath in Israel. And so people there are on holiday, and the Israeli officials would not have been able to do any kind of a meeting. So if you were to land there and to do a meeting, it would have to be another day. But more than that, I think here deliberate message was being sent that we want to dehyphenate the relationship and try and get to Ramallah, not going through directly any kind of Israeli control area. Because he could even have, let's say, driven from Amman to Ramallah.
That's true.
Just an hour plus or so. But then you have to go through Israeli control area. By going by helicopter, even though you need sort of a concurrence of the Israeli authorities.
He's flown over the Israeli airspace, but he's not landed in
Israeli occupied airspace.
That's
but
true.
Yes, but he's not had to go formally through any Israeli control area. So I think it's a message that we would like to pursue both these bilateral relationships in a dehyphenated manner, although we maintain our position on the Israel part. And here the other thing I wanted to mention was about Yasser Arafat. As you saw, the first event there was laying a wreath at the memorial to Yasser Arafat. He has a certain presence and a role in the Palestinian leadership historically, even though from time to time his leadership had been contested. And for a long time he was seen as a friend of India, because Yasser Arafat himself was seen as a secular leader among the Palestinian people, because there have been strands of religion-based leadership within the Palestinian structures. So Yasser Arafat embodying that and building a good relationship with Indian leaders and seen from time to time as a friend of India, I think it's important that this gesture was there. And of course, he would also be visiting the museum and then...
Absolutely. Now, these are the very first visuals that we are getting of the Indian Prime Minister in Ramallah. He just landed. He's also placed the wreath at the mausoleum for Yasser Arafat, who led the Palestinian people from 1968 till his demise in 2004. Ramesh, if I can bring you in on this. The Indian Prime Minister is there. It's not going to be a 3-day visit like what it was when he visited the state of Israel. This is more like a 3.5-hour visit. Any reason as to why it was kept that short?
Well, as you mentioned, Mohammed, this is a 3-hour visit. He landed at about 10 a.m. local time, and he will depart Ramallah for Amman at about 1:10 p.m. local time. So it's a 3-hour visit, very high on symbolism and substance at the same time. Remember, Prime Minister Modi is the first world leader to land in Ramallah, Palestine, after the UNGA vote. And in doing so, as I mentioned, he chose to bypass Israeli territory, choosing to land in Ramallah directly from Amman. But that said, several agreements are expected to sign later this afternoon, especially after his bilateral with President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine, including in the area of development aid and inauguration of a diplomatic institute, which is being set up with India's assistance. So India looking to intensify and remain engaged with Palestine, even as it diversifies its ties with Israel on the other hand.
Absolutely, indeed. And Ambassador, if I could bring you in on this, the Indian Prime Minister, he's vastly popular. He's seen as someone who's actually, pursuing this hard policy of trying to get India as a brand abroad. Now, he being present there, and considering the closeness that we've got with the State of Israel, do you think, how would this be viewed in the State of Israel?
So I think they would have preferred, both the government, that would be my assessment, and the people there, that if he visited Palestine, he also visited Israel. But they would be reassured by the fact that he has visited Israel and that he's been the first Indian Prime Minister to make that step. And then he received Israeli Prime Minister here. So the preferred option would have been certainly that he also visit Israel. But I think
would Israel see that as a snub?
No, because I think they would be reassured by the fact, the kind of exchanges that have happened,
rapport with the two leaders,
the rapport between the two leaders. So I would say, although they would have a preferred option, they are sufficiently reassured not to really be concerned by the Prime Minister going directly. And second, as I mentioned, today is Sabbath, and Israeli officials don't work on Sabbath. So that is another aspect. In terms of the 3-hour visit that you mentioned, the length of the visit, of course, has to be also determined by the kind of activity that you can do. And the Prime Minister's visit, by the nature of the visit, had to be confined to Ramallah. Because if you go to any other city within the Palestinian areas, again, Israeli concurrence, Israeli checkpoints, those kind of issues would come in aside from the security dimension. Also, the trade and economic aspects of cooperation with Palestinian areas are limited. We essentially have capacity building effort, and the size of any Indian origin population is also very, very small.
Extremely limited.
So it's very difficult to look at doing a major extended visit. And most other leaders who have visited Palestinian areas, including those who have gone through Israel, have normally gone for very, very short visits. So I think that's
absolutely, indeed. And also, Ramesh, if I can, bring you in for the last one in this case. Immediately in the aftermath of Donald Trump's announcement that Jerusalem will be recognized as the capital of Israel, Mike Pence faced a lot of protests from the Palestinians, but that is not the sort of welcome that the Indian Prime Minister has been getting. Even though he's someone who has shown himself to be a very close friend of Israel, he's been welcomed very warmly. How do you read that?
Indeed, Mohammed. And just as an aside, former President Pranab Mukherjee indeed did make a visit to Ramallah, and he stayed overnight. So it's not as if India has chosen to completely ignore the sensitivities involved in planning and organizing a visit to Palestine. But that said, coming back to Prime Minister Modi's visit, as I mentioned, this is high on symbolism and substance alike. Given the handicap that India faces in reaching out to Palestine, under the circumstances, India is more than made up by agreeing to sign a number of agreements in the fields of development aid, infrastructure, capacity building, education, health, and so on. And also, remember this, as I mentioned, this is, I can't emphasize this enough, Mohammed, this is a first high-level visit by any world leader to Ramallah after the UNGA vote, which voted against the U.S. decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.